Welcome to America's Defense Communities, the podcast. I'm ADC on-base editor Randy Ford. Back in March, not long after Brendan Owens began his job as Assistant Secretary of Defense for Energy, Installations, and Environment, one of his first stops was the Defense Communities National Summit. He'll be joining ADC again in November at the Installation Innovation Forum in Orlando. But in the meantime, we wanted to hear what his office is working on as it relates to defense communities, including housing, resilience, PFAS cleanup, defense infrastructure, military community partnerships, and the DSIP program, plus more. So Assistant Secretary Owens sat down with me. Here's our conversation. So you first joined ADC at the Defense Communities National Summit in March, and that was just about a month into your new position. So several months later now, how do you feel about the progress you've been able to make?
Yeah, so I appreciated the opportunity to engage with ADC very early on, probably maybe arguably too early on, and to know anything worth saying out loud. I think over the course of the last several months, I've had the opportunity to get out and travel and be with people who are part of defense communities. So we've done a number of trips all across the U.S., outside the U.S., and getting to engage in those conversations has really given me a much better understanding of what the relationship between the defense community and the installation needs to look like, and what success looks like, and in some instances what success where we should be striving to do more. So from that standpoint, it's been very valuable to do that. In terms of progress that we've made, I know that if I had going into this, I would have expected to do more than we have been able to do. But we have had some significant progress that I think we can talk about around PFAS, around cleanup, around housing, and but I would still say that we're at the beginning of what I'd like to say. A year from now, we will have accomplished.
Well, let's talk about housing then. So every defense community, like a lot of communities, are facing housing issues. So some of it's the condition of housing on base. Some of it is a shortage of housing off base. Are there steps DoD and communities can take in the near term to make for healthier, more affordable places for service members and families to live?
Yeah, I think there are. And first of all, let me just sort of level set. Every time we go to an installation, we do a housing tour, right? Because I'm in the job, in addition to being the assistant secretary, I'm also the chief housing officer for DoD. So I have an obligation to really understand what the conditions of the housings that we are asking our service members and their families to live in, whether it's accompanied or whether it's unaccompanied. And that has been another sort of foundational educational piece of the last 8 months of in this chair. So there's several things that I think are worth talking about. One is that we are accelerating our investment in housing. We are working with the military departments to make sure that we are resourcing the military housing projects well and better than they have been, making sure that we are making investments in unaccompanied housing that bring it up to standard, because this is an obligation that DoD has to make sure that safe, affordable housing is out there for our families and for our service members. So one specific thing on base housing related that I think would be better, and it might seem relatively mundane, but making sure that our service members, particularly when they're living in privatized housing, understand the tenant bill of rights. We worked hard to get this put into place. I think it was a good step, and it was a step in the right direction in terms of what we owe our service members and their families. But what we can't necessarily force education on people. So one of the things that I'd like to just sort of ring the bell on is making sure that people are out there going through the process of educating themselves about the resources that they have availability on, right? So whether that's the housing office on the installation, whether that's the dispute resolution process, whether it's knowing who to call and when to escalate things, there's a lot of really excellent information and training that's out there. And while I know it's the thing that you want to deal with the least, making sure that you're not trying to learn the process when it's needed is really does come in handy. We've seen that over and over again. When people understand the dispute resolution process well, they get good results. When they don't understand it, they tend to get lost in a complicated maze of challenges, and that doesn't work for anybody's best interest. So investing a little bit of time at the outset, level setting to make sure that you have a good understanding of what your tenant bill of rights entitles you to is an investment that's gonna make it easier on our end to deliver the quality of the housing and the service that we know that service members and their families deserve.
Let's talk about climate change a little bit. So we've had multiple extreme weather events this year, and Anderson Air Force Base on Guam was hit really hard. But fortunately, most installations themselves have largely been spared. But that's not always going to be the case. There are going to be more of these weather systems. So what are solutions and how can communities support those? Not asking you to solve climate change right this second, but again, some of the concrete steps that we can be taking to help.
I think it's a great point. And it is a partnership that's necessary, because the thing that I think that I did say back in March, which I still do believe, when you look at the fact that 70% of the people who work on military installations live in the community, it's not just about hardening inside the fence line. So with that as kind of the backdrop, there are strategies that will make communities more resilient. And some of those are DoD funded. I think the Defense Community Infrastructure Pilot program is a great example of a place where DoD resources can be brought to bear to fix community installation, to fix resilience challenges in a community. So I would encourage the folks who are in positions to put together packages to compete for that money in future years, engage actively and early to make sure that we are identifying the best resilience projects that we can identify to hit those things. But beyond that, I think that making sure that people are following the preparedness steps that are out there to make sure that the communities themselves are capable of being independent as they need to be, and responding quickly in the event of an emergency. And then, lastly, I think, which is something that I don't think defense communities really suffer from a lack of, is just pulling together when things get hard, right? I think that's a baseline level of things that we know that we can rely on service members and their families for, and just being ready to do that when things get bumpy is critical.
So you mentioned PFAS earlier. You spoke to ADC in May to talk about PFAS cleanup and how that's a priority for DoD. And you said then that it requires direct engagement with communities. What does that engagement look like in your mind?
Well, for us so far, it's looked like exactly what I said, direct engagement. We've had dozens of meetings with community advocates, with installations, with special interest groups that are focused on this, with subject matter experts who are working on the science and the technology for detection and disposal and treatment options. So we've really taken this as a significant chunk of the portfolio and tried to make progress in a bunch of different ways. And I can talk a little bit about some of the specific things that we've put in place. I've signed 4 department-wide PFAS policies over the course of the last 5 months that really are looking to change the way that we engage for the better. We're setting the military departments up to be actively engaged in response activities related to what we expect to be action around the maximum contaminant level for PFAS in drinking water. We know the EPA has put out proposed levels that are significantly lower, orders of magnitude lower than the levels that we're currently operating on. So we're empowering the military departments to take the steps that are necessary to get ready for that, for those levels to come into play. That requires reassessment of all the data that we currently have, as well as going out and resampling where that's necessary. We've sped up some testing. We've enabled speeding up of testing requirements on groundwater by changing a little bit about what we will look at in terms of testing requirements. We have put in place more transparency guidance around what people should expect of the disclosure of the data that we ascertain when we do the testing in communities. And then we've also we put in place a policy that was seeking to speed up the implementation of interim removal activities under CERCLA. We know that CERCLA is a long process, but we want to make sure that we are acting when we have information that enables us to act under the law. So that has enabled us to, in Michigan, former Wurtsmith Air Force Base, we announced a series of interim removal activities under CERCLA that we're going to be implementing sooner than they would have come sooner than they would have come if that policy that we put in place hadn't existed. And I think we've seen in Pease, the former Pease Air Force Base, evidence that the transparency policy that we put in place is also being well received. So, we are not close to being even started on this in the time that I have left with this position, but we are hoping that what we've put in place so far creates momentum in a direction that, we are not talking about eaches, right? The ones and twos. We're talking about dozens and dozens and dozens of projects that are going forward based on our ability now that the policies are in place. So we're going to continue to do community meetings. We're going to continue to engage through our RABs, and we're going to continue to move as quickly as we can, given what our constraints are under CERCLA.
Thinking about the other priority areas that are top of mind for your team right now, what are some of those that defense leaders can be helpful with?
Yeah, I mean, we touched on the big things, right? We touched on resilience and community resilience, and DSIP plays a role there. We touched on PFAS, and again, community advocacy work at the local level, engaging with your restoration advisory board, engaging with the installation on water treatment and testing and groundwater testing are critical. We need that support. We need those engagement points to make it possible for us to get the data that we need to move the interim removal activities ahead. And we touched on housing, right? So all of those things are the places that from a community engagement standpoint that we really need to continue to nurture and grow relationships. I would say the other place that we're seeing growing importance is in defense critical infrastructure. We know that there are places that we need to invest resources in order to make sure that we can have all of the readiness and resilience that we need at an installation level that are in the community. So we've been engaging with utilities to make sure that we can identify those places and make the investments that are necessary. But we also want to make sure that while we're doing that, we are also making the community more resilient. So finding those places where investments that are going to be made in defense critical infrastructure, we're also delivering community resilience is a place that we're going to need partnership and engagement with defense, with folks in the community.
All right. That's all I had. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to joining the group in November. I feel like every time we have a conversation like this or every time we have an engagement, there's an opportunity to hear about what can be done to move the ball forward, both in partnership with and in support of the defense community and DoD. So when we get together in November, I know that the focus is going to be on housing, and I really look forward to hearing what people have to say about what we can do better and where we can support and continue to advance the agenda.
I want to thank Assistant Secretary of Defense Brendan Owens for taking the time to talk with us. As I said earlier, we'll hear from him again at ADC's Installation Innovation in November. You can find out more and register to join us at installationinnovation.org. America's Defense Communities, the podcast, is a production of the Association of Defense Communities, online at defensecommunities.org. That's also where you can sign up for our daily on-base newsletter. This episode was produced and mixed by Mark Parrott. Thanks for listening.